Our next speaker is a nearly 19 activist with aspirations of world domination, otherwise known as kicking religious influence out of the government. If you could all give a warm welcome to Lux Pickel.
Ageism, which I feel is something that is not very well discussed in the skeptic community, and obviously I'm boring you with it because there seems to be a lot of issues that we're going over right now. We're having a lot of contention with sexism and with racism, and we're also just now looking at classism and ableism and how all these different things are keeping the skeptic community from becoming a really cohesive movement. And we always say, like, oh, there's a bunch of old white men in the skeptic community, and I feel like we're addressing the white and the men part, but not so much the old part. Not that I'm calling you guys old. And this is particularly important to me because I'm 18 years old. I'm going to be 19 in a week and a half. I developed cognitively much earlier than most people my age, so I've been dealing with discrimination according to my age for a really long time, and I find it to be particularly obnoxious. So here I am boring you about it. First thing we need to do as good skeptics is to define our terminology. So according to Merriam-Webster, ageism, which is a noun, by the way, prejudice or discrimination against a particular age group and especially the elderly. That's the dictionary definition, is especially the elderly. And I put an asterisk next to discrimination because I'm not just talking about systematic, like you're a terrible person because you're too young, but the same kind of things that we see in sexism, which is sometimes just subtle and conversational and doesn't seem to be really enforcing a really big thing, but it can, a lot of little things build up into a lot. So I just kind of want to scrap the especially old part, and as you can see, it's now the Pickel Merriam-Webster definition. I still feel, though, that this definition doesn't really encompass everything that ageism is. Ageism, to me, is, it's also got to do with your level of experience and not just your age, so I'm just going to scrap the whole thing, except for the first 3 words. This is now from the Dictionary of Pickel, as you can see. Prejudice or discrimination based on one's apparent age or level of experience. So anybody who sees you and thinks because of the way that you look or anything like that, that you are to be judged differently or treated differently, if you haven't been to college or if you don't have kids yet, like any of that kind of stuff is really what I'm talking about. And I'm going to particularly pick on religion because it's our favorite thing to pick on, of course. And the first thing I'm going to talk about, which might not seem really relevant, is male circumcision. And I find that to be inherently ageist in the sense that we're completely taking away the option to have control over your body. And it seems like it contributes to the parents' ability to be parents being more important than the bodily autonomy of the children. So this was an Egyptian practice originally, which then was picked up by Judaism and then Christianity, and then the Muslim culture from the story of Abraham, which is in the Old Testament. And that whole thing just says, and ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin. It shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man child in your generations. And of course, if you don't have your penis circumcised, you are going to have your soul cut off from your people. So sorry, any of you guys who are uncut, your souls are cut off from your people. 8 days old, a young child, 8 days old, is going to have this genital mutilation essentially done to them, which, circumcision in itself is not the worst thing in the world, and I'm not saying anything bad against it. It's the choice of not being even given, and that itself just seems like inherently wrong to me. So God says to do it, it's still legal to do it, totally legal for parents to do that kind of thing, and it doesn't matter at all, apparently. So here's some numbers about circumcision. About 50% of people in 2010 are circumcised. Again, completely non-consensual thing. Nobody has a choice about it. There are some risks inherent to it. It's not necessarily just like inherently wrong, but there are some chances of death from anesthesia, and there are about 100 deaths directly related to circumcision. A lot of those are from infection and blood loss. So it's not only completely non-consensual, it's also non-essential, and these are deaths that are 100% avoidable. And again, it's a very small number, but that's a choice that's being taken away from them, and there are deaths that occur from it, which is insane to me. So the second thing I want to talk about is parental medical neglect, and we've been hearing a lot about this being people not giving their children proper medical care, like praying away their illnesses or their ailments rather than actually doing something evidence-based. And I've got a couple examples of this actually. There was a pretty big case that happened. In September 26th, 2009, this baby David Hickman was born, and he was 2 months premature. He had underdeveloped lungs. He died 9 hours after he was born because he had a bacterial infection. Something that's very easily fixed, something that can be very easily addressed. Several different doctors spoke about it during the trial, about how it's a completely avoidable, he did not need to die. And his father, who was making the calls on this, apparently the mother didn't have a particular opinion on this, he was praying in the moment before the child died, and he was anointing him with oil rather than actually doing anything to fix the problem. If they had gone to the hospital, which you should do, by the way, if your baby is 2 months premature, you should be going to the hospital. I don't understand, no, it doesn't make sense. Yes, so they were doing all these other things and not treating the child who died. 2 years later, they were sentenced and convicted. I think it was 6 years in prison they spent. So definitely justice on their part. These guys are in a church in Oregon called the Followers of Christ, and this is not the only instance of people in this church having this exact same issue. The Weiland family, their daughter had a growth on her eye, and it almost ruined her eye, and they ended up only spending like 90 days in jail. Yeah, 90 days in jail for putting their daughter's sight permanently at risk. This other instance, Rockwall Sevi, also his parents were a member of this church, was a 14-year-old who died from pneumonia. And the fact that a fully developed human being could die of something like pneumonia in this day and age it's crazy to me. And that right of the 14-year-old to medical care was superseded by the religious rights of his parents to completely disregard his need for health and bodily autonomy. And I couldn't actually find any more information about that. That line right there is like the entirety of everything that anybody knows about this kid who died. We've also got another case in which Karen Newman died from diabetic complications. She had a lack of insulin, and she was sick for a whole month with nausea and a loss of appetite, and she was growing weaker and weaker, and her parents just let her die, basically. This was a completely, well in advance, they knew that it was going to happen, they knew that they could do something about it, and yet nobody did anything about it. None of her family members stepped in and said, this girl needs to be treated, and she died. Why am I making noises? Okay. Yes, and there was the pediatrician, Dr. Seth Asser was the person talking in the prosecution for the trial of the Hickmans, and there's not a very large number of deaths that occur because of this kind of neglect, but once again, completely avoidable deaths that absolutely don't need to happen, that are just, it's completely unreasonable. Let's use that term because it's a nice one. And the last thing is the systematic child molestation that goes on in the Catholic Church. All these things, I think, contribute to the general oppression of younger people. So let's statistics on this. I've got some numbers. There was a report, the John Jay report in 2004, which, it was commissioned by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, so acknowledge that there might be some bias in there. There were a little over 10,000 reported victims of clergy sexual abuse under 18 in that 52-year period of time. Those are just the ones that are reported and documented, though, so we have to keep in mind that that number is probably larger than it is. This is the Catholic, their own record of all the abuse. Among those, 22% were 10 or younger. We see a big spike of 51% in 11 to 14-year-olds, which is interesting. I'm not really sure what the cause is behind that, but it's interesting. And then 27% of slightly older. Only about 9,000 of those 10,000 mentioned any kind of investigation. So these are things that were reported and then not investigated. That's over 1,000 reports of this happening that were not even looked into, which indicates to me that, once again, the religious rights of the parent supersede the rights of the child to health and safety and autonomy. I decided to make a chart, because I figured, whatever, it's PowerPoint, let's make a chart. Of those which mentioned investigations, 31 were uninvestigated, that's the other number over there. 55% they decided were substantiated. That next 13% were unsubstantiated. A very, very small number of these were decidedly false. There's a very, very small number of any of these that end up actually not being true. They keep happening, and they are somehow still being sheltered and moved around and protected by the higher-ups in the Catholic Church, which I'm sure everybody knows and is angry about. Doesn't really seem like a lot of fun to me. So, cultural ageism, statutory rape. Not the same thing as child molestation. Generally, statutory rape is considered to be a lot less significant of a problem, and it's not dealt with in the same way at all. Statutory rape was with a post-pubescent child or minor. Until a person reaches a certain age, according to the law, they're not capable of giving consent. In most states, including Kansas, the age is 16. I believe there are 39 states in which the age is 16. The rest of them are either 17 or 18. So anytime a teenager has sex before the age of 16, they have been raped. So, for example, somebody loses their virginity when they're 14. Every single time they have sex between then and the time they turn 16, they're being raped, according to the law. There are certain exemptions to that, called Romeo and Juliet laws, and in particular in Kansas, if the younger party is 14 or 15 years old, and the older party is 19 or younger, there's a reduced amount of consequences, or they just kind of let it go. You can still try to push charges. A lot of parents will try to use this. And the problem here isn't that there are statutory rape laws. Obviously, I'm not against statutory rape laws because we do need to protect younger people in certain situations, but there are instances in which these laws are used to police the sexual activity of younger people. I can't find any statistics about this because it just hasn't been covered, but I've got several anecdotes from various people that I know. I personally had my sex life policed by my mother, threatening me to give somebody whatever statutory rape. And I think that even 2 or 3 instances of that happening means that we need to look into this and that it's a potential problem. I don't know what the solution is, but these things are being used to try to control young people rather than actually do anything to help anyone. So jobs. Jobs are a thing. I didn't get a job at all until after I was 18. And granted, I got that job because you have to sell cigarettes, and if you have to be 18 to sell cigarettes. I tried for 3 years to get a job when I was not 18, and I turned 18 and 2 months later got the job that I have right now. I see that as a widespread kind of thing. I know I've talked to a lot of people, and once again, there aren't very many statistics behind this, but younger people are often disregarded for positions, regardless of whether or not they may be more apt for the position, simply because they don't have the amount of experience. So once again, experience, not necessarily just age as a number. There was a report done in the UK, Ageism, Attitudes and Experiences of Young People. They found that a lot of times people were, it's during the interview process that we see a lot of this happening. They'll say things like, we're looking for a mature person to do this, or a young, bright thing, and they're specifically referring to age or experience. And I think that in the introduction of a job, if the very first thing you're going to do is say that we need an experienced person, you're completely eliminating an entire group of people that could potentially contribute and be beneficial. And not only that, I'd like to make another point that some kids move out of their parents' houses before they're 18. I'm sure that we all know somebody who's done it. I did it. Now you know somebody who did it. So I moved out. I needed a job during that time. I couldn't get a job. I was lucky enough to be supported by other people, but the simple fact that I, on my own, as a younger than 18 person, needing to support myself, wouldn't have been able to find work it's obscene to me. I understand the need to protect younger people from being exploited. Like a 12-year-old does not need to be doing hard labor, but you can work at a gas station and that's fine. And if you need to, you have to be able to support yourself. And it's completely flabbergasted me that we're okay with just saying, whatever, you're so young, it's not even important right now. Well, no, I actually need this money to be able to eat tomorrow. Sorry, frustrates me, you can tell. Voting age. Interesting enough. I hadn't really thought about the voting age being an issue until, 2012 when I voted for Obama. Yeah. Interesting argument. There's a group called the National Youth Rights Association, I think. Yeah. And there's an actual group that lobby for the rights of young people. And they have this report, the top 10 reasons to lower the voting age. And there's three of the interesting ones was paying taxes, living under the laws, not having a vote. Taxation without representation is what that is. If you are younger than 18 and you have a job and you're being taxed, which everybody is, and if you're paying sales tax, as a matter of fact, even if you don't have a job and you're just paying sales tax, I'm paying money to the government and I have absolutely no say with what they do with that money, which I thought was a very interesting point. Something I hadn't thought about before, still very true. The whole reason that we had the revolution back in the day was taxation without representation and not having a say in how we're being governed. So this next one kind of ties into that, a double standard of adult responsibilities but not rights. That also encompasses being charged as an adult in certain crimes, which can happen, and still not having any say in that process, not being able to vote on how those issues are dealt with. It's a little disenfranchising. It's saying your opinion doesn't matter on this subject because you're too young to have an informed opinion. And this last one I added just because it made me laugh. If you let stupid adults vote, why not let intelligent kids vote? Which is great. And I think it's a really valid point. There are a lot of uneducated adults trying to make voting decisions. Like, I can't understand every single person who voted for Romney, especially women. Like, that kind of cognitive dissonance just drives me insane. I'm younger than most people. I happened to be 18 this last election year, and even if I hadn't been, I would have done everything I could to get everybody I know to vote for Obama, because it means something to me. I think I should have a say, and fortunately now I'm over the age, I've got the right numbers going on, that I can make these informed decisions now, even though I could have been making them 3 or 4 years ago. So yeah, just made me laugh. Stupid people. Okay, the last thing is sheltering the young, which is kind of more of a social thing and less to do with laws, more like keeping children from the truth on certain things. For example, my friend Olivia, my co-blogger Olivia on Teen Skeptic, was writing about some kids that she was working with over the summer, and how not telling the children things doesn't mean that they're not going to find out. It just means that they're not going to be able to deal with it as well. So, for example, one of the girls, her mom told her that there were fireworks outside, and the little girl was talking to one of her friends and said, "My mom thinks I'm so stupid, I know they're gunshots, but she told me they're fireworks." That kind of sheltering doesn't do anything. All it teaches the children that it's good to keep secrets, or that it's better to keep secrets, and that they are not able to handle the information. It can be explained in such a way that they would understand without crushing their poor, gentle, tiny brains. And we do this to teenagers as well by not teaching them sex education, which is kind of crazy. Yes, sex education. Trying to teach kids abstinence-only sex education is huge, huge underestimation of their ability to handle adult situations. They need to know about condom use and everything, all the delicious things that Emily was talking about earlier, and I've got lube all over this thing still. It just seems to me to be so condescending to think that, oh, we're just going to tell them this thing and they're going to go along with it, which is not how it works. Not how it works. Oh, yes, doubting the honesty of kids also is another thing that I've noticed happens. Sometimes a parent will just flippantly disregard whatever the kid says. I'm going to go over to my friends to study, and the automatic assumption is that they're lying or that they're being untruthful because they're trying to hide something. And that kind of thing I actually see way more. Just generally disregarding young people's opinions overall because they're not being truthful or because they can't possibly know what they're talking about, or any number of things like that that are just completely untrue and unfounded, and it contributes to this cultural view of young people being incapable. And that's just not the case, and we need a stronger youth in our country. You know, the 18 to 25, they're really voting a lot right now, for example, and we see a lot of atheists in that age range. It's a group of people that we need to be tapping, and I don't understand why we're not doing more of that. So what this means for skepticism, to me, is we're addressing some of these bigger issues like racism and sexism, and then not addressing that, like, old white man, the old part. I'm 18. I don't know of any other people my age who get up and do this in front of people. And actually, I was kind of surprised at having this opportunity. I wouldn't have had it if it weren't for the managing editor of Teen Skeptic who emailed Austin about it. And I also appreciate the inexperience of the people organizing this thing for letting me, a person who's never done this, come up on your stage and do it. So thanks for that. We need to do a lot more, I think, to try to get people in. And it's not just what can adults do, it's what can we get our current youth who are interested, like what can we get them to do? Like if we've got college students who are in SSA, can we get them to work with the high schools in the area to start SSA? I know JT used to work with SSA High School. That's not something that's been at the forefront, and it's not something that's been really aggressively addressed to me. Again, most people my age don't get up in front of people and do this. Another thing is that Teen Skeptic is a website affiliated with the Skeptic Network. I was actually turned off from listening to it because I'm so used to being condescended to that it's actually kind of insane that you people treat me like an adult. It's really, really weird to me that I actually get respect and I'm treated like an equal. And I think that that might also be something that turns people off because, you know, we like to talk about sophisticated things and we like to speak about really in-depth stuff, and I can see it being really easy to flippantly disregard young people because we so often flippantly disregard the religious for being dumb or whatever, like Dan trying to get everybody to stop saying that people are stupid. And I think that oftentimes those things are kind of conflated with one another, being young and also being less intelligent or less able. And I don't think that that's a good idea to have. I don't think that's a really good way to treat any of the situation. And I don't know how to do that exactly. All I know is to be able to reach out to people. Teen Skeptic is one of the Skeptic Network sites, and I think that Skeptic just launched a site for teachers to try to get teachers like actively teaching skepticism and that type of thinking in their classrooms. I don't know exactly what to do. I don't have the solutions. It would take a long time to figure it out. This is actually not even my area of expertise. The thing that I want to do is separation of church and state. But I'm the only one my age talking about this once again. So all I can say is that we've got to stop underestimating people. And you would never guess, talking to me, that I'm as young as I am. And it saddens me that people are surprised when they find out how old I am. They're like, oh, you've got to be like 25. No, I'm actually like 7 years younger than that, really. So we just automatically assume that this group of people doesn't have anything of value to contribute, and we're not making a big effort to make that part of what we're doing and part of what we're interested in. And I understand that sexism is a really big problem for us right now, and that minorities, racial minorities, are a big problem. We're having a difficult time getting these people involved because, you know, they come to these events and they see a sea of white guys, and it's difficult to want to be involved in those situations. But it's even more difficult as a young person to try to insert ourselves into this adult world that we already have a really difficult time finding ourselves a place in. It's not easy to go from this place to that place, and the support needed and the transition that's happening there, I just don't see enough of it, and I would really love to see more people my age getting involved in this way. We've got Convergence is a sci-fi con that happens in July, and the Skeptic Network and the Free Thought Blog Network do their thing there. And we're getting a ton of people from Teen Skeptic to apply to be on panels at that. And that's a more informal, easier thing to get people to do. I would love to see that. I would love to see more of that. If we could just get more people my age to come to these things, to even come to them in the first place, much less feel confident enough to come up here and speak to you about things that I think are important or that they think are important. So all I can say is that I would really love to see us being more welcoming, being less flippantly disregarding if somebody doesn't have a college degree or, you know, whatever. You're not old enough, you don't understand, you couldn't possibly know. You don't understand atheism until you know somebody who's died or whatever. So all I can say, I really want you guys to think about it and try to make an effort to reach out to somebody who matters. If you've got younger people, if you've got nephews, nieces, whatever, that you want to plant the seed of doubt, you know, so to say, just do that. Get people involved. Try to get people involved. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions?
Questions? Alrighty. Say some stuff. You were there.
A 5-year-old can buy a pack of gum and pay tax on it. How far would we have to lower the voting age to escape ageism? And is there any cutoff that wouldn't be totally arbitrary? If we had a reading comprehension test, a lot of kids would pass it and be able to vote, but a lot of adults would vote.
That's true. I agree with that, actually. It's really hard to draw a line because it is so arbitrary. There's a point at which, you know, 16-year-old might be able to do something that a 14-year-old couldn't, and vice versa. Again, I don't have all the solutions. It would probably have to be something like a test or something like that to be able to really determine, but I don't see that kind of restructuring actually happening. It's just a problem to acknowledge.
I really hope this doesn't come out the wrong way, but you strike me as unique. Like, I know a number of 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. Maybe I just travel in the wrong circles, but you seem much more intelligent than the typical 18-year-old that I encounter. So assuming that theory, I'm reflecting on what would be the impact if, say, we did lower the voting age, if people of your intelligence at that age are rather rare or unique. Could that be more harm than good?
I would agree with that, but only to the extent that I'm exceptional in any age group, and I don't mean to be like a douche, but I'm actually kind of an intelligent person. So I think that any age group you pick is going to have a lot of people who aren't qualified to make those decisions, or who are blind to the truth enough that they don't want to acknowledge that whatever they're doing is wrong, or they're voting the wrong way.
I guess what I'm saying is, do you think the majority of 17-year-olds are cognitively developed enough to the point to have the responsibility to vote?
I would say that a large enough number of them are that it's not fair to continue to deny them the right. If you can be charged as an adult in a crime when you're 17, you should probably be able to vote. Just saying. Let's go with you.
Yeah, so I'm going to assume here that you're part of some kind of local skeptic or atheist or church-state separation group. You're not?
I actually didn't know that there was one. I live in Lawrence, and I know they've got the Society of Open-Minded Atheists and Agnostics, but I didn't know that that was a community group until today.
Okay.
So I plan on being involved, but I haven't had the opportunity. I also work at night, and I would normally be dead asleep right now, so it's hard for me to really get into that when I'm asleep during every single evening.
I worked last night too, but okay, so I'll change my question a little bit. What would make you feel more welcome at that sort of group?
Gosh, I don't know. Maybe if they were marketing themselves toward younger people. Or I don't go to college, and so a lot of that goes directly to the colleges if they are going for someone in my age group. I would like to see more high school involvement. I would love to see more teachers getting involved in that. I personally have considered just doing my own outreach and just contacting people at some of the local high schools or the high school that I went to and being like, okay, I know that you believe this way. How can I help you start a group? That's all you can really do is help people start groups and be involved and say, hey, let's go to this place where all these young people are and get them to come into our thing. Like we do the same kind of marketing to a lot of other groups. Not so much with the young people, though. Let's go with somebody way up there. You two can fight over it.
Okay, I kind of have a couple questions. I would make the argument, number one, not necessarily the argument, but you're a very exceptionally intelligent person. I think exception being the key word. Whereas most 18-year-olds aren't at the, not necessarily intelligence basis that you are, but they're not the informative basis. I think that cognitively, developmentally is different as far as age group, as far as informative wise. If I'm making a choice as to like whether somebody has 3 years of college experience and 2 years of college experience, I'm probably going to they're the same age, they're the same sex, they're the same race, I'm probably going to go with the ones with more experience. So are you advocating for like the equality of the informative brain as well as the intelligence brain, or are you just kind of advocating for the overall equality?
I would say overall equality. A lot of it has to do not necessarily with how intelligent someone is or anything like that, but the fact that generalized statements can be made, like, you know, most kids your age aren't, it sounds kind of exactly the same to me as any kind of broad statement like that about women, or, you know, whatever, like, oh, atheism is just a guy thing, whatever. That's kind of exactly how that sounds to me, because I know a lot of people in my peer group who aren't really qualified to either with intelligence or with being informed. But I don't think that it's fair to describe an entire group of people that way. It just strikes me wrong. You want to write there?
I'm 20 years old, so is Ryan right here, so we're not that far age-wise. But at our college, we go to UCO in Epping, Oklahoma, and every year they have a large drive to enroll students to vote. And the sad thing is most people our age don't give a shit. They don't pay attention politically, and so I think that's a big factor in the fact that the voting age hasn't been lowered. It's because, you know, everybody at any age is capable of deciding to commit a crime, but just a lot of people our age aren't politically informed. So I mean, you were probably in a percentile that's less than, I would say, 30%. I was in the same shoes as you, that I was very politically motivated. The day I turned 18, I was registered to vote. I voted in the following election in November. But I just think that, you know, I kind of like where it's at as is, because it gives, you know, younger people that are politically motivated, it gives them motivation to get their friends politically motivated. That, hey, you need to go register to vote. You need to, you know, hey, do this. I think that there are ways that people who aren't old enough to vote can help politically without voting themselves. That's true.
Something you said earlier in your comment that a lot of people just don't seem to give a shit. It's kind of like, don't you think they would care a little bit more if anybody talked to them about that stuff? If anybody like leveled with them and said like, hey, you're kind of like mostly an adult now. Like, what do you think about this issue? I don't see that happening very much, and I think that that's something that I mean, I don't know. I don't even know how to address that, but. Yeah, I'm also really abnormal in being politically motivated in high school, and I tried to get my friends into it. They just seemed to think that it was not important, and actually, now that I've spoken to more adults about that, it seems to be a cultural reflection. So these kids' parents probably didn't make them think that politics were important, and that really is just something that has to be done, like people like you and I. We have to talk to people our own age and try to, you know, understand that this is important. Tell people that it does matter, and that, you know, even though they may have thought their entire lives that, you know, whatever, it's politics, like, actually it matters. This is how people are going to govern you and decide how you're going to live your life. So I don't think that it has to do with necessarily people just not caring. I feel like it's more to do with having not been spoken to about it on a non-condescending level. If that makes any sense. White sweater there.
Currently, somebody has to be 18 to enter into a legally binding contract. Do you also advocate for lowering that so someone can enter into a car purchasing contract, a marriage contract, voluntarily signing up for the U.S. military, happen more often if we lower that?
That's a distinct possibility, that there would be a higher instance of regretting decisions. I think that kind of applies to a lot of different things, and not just that. I'm not advocating for necessarily lowering the age. I don't think that it should be a number. If we could test for every single one of those things, that would actually be how I would ideally approach everything. I would have gotten married like at least a full year before I did. I got married to my husband in October. Personally, I'm an exception, and there are other people who, might be more apt to be in the military when they're 17 rather than when they're 18, and that year doesn't make any difference for them. Other people, not even cognitively mature at age 25. So I don't really think that that's the kind of thing that should even necessarily be dictated by age, because it's so arbitrary and it's subjective. It's very different for every single person. We develop at different points. So I do think that it's possible that if we were to just move the age, that there would be a higher instance of regrettable decisions occurring. I don't think that's a blanket solution to the problem. Oh God, you have a lot of questions, you people. Way back there, hi.
Here?
Yeah.
I really appreciated your talk and sort of putting yourself out there in this way, talking about how important it is to do more and effective outreach to young people. I think it's important for us as a collective research community to look at our history in this regard. Something like 13 years ago, one of the organizations founded the Young Freethinker Alliance for outreach to high school students. There's SSA's high school outreach, Campus Free Fund Alliance. All of that sort of turned into Civified on campus. So I can't imagine anyone disagreeing with the position, the well thought out position, that there should be no barriers to participation for anyone, even if they're young. It seems to me we have a harder nut to crack, though, which is not the issue of excluding people, but of getting folks who want to get more involved to care enough to get involved. And a few of the questions have already talked about that sort of applicant. So if there were 10 of you who wanted to be involved in programs at the regional conferences across the country, I think there would be a place for them. So my question is, what is it that young people who are already at can do to spread the word, as opposed to only the understandable frustration you express if you think you're being excluded?
So what can young people do to help out with that goal? I was just listening to Hemant Mehta on an interview talking about this, and it's really just trying to get enough people together to start a group, or to say, okay, we're all going to go collectively as a group to go to this thing. There aren't very many other things that can be done. It's all very grassroots. It's all very individual. If I were still in high school, I would be doing that kind of thing. I mean, even in Kansas being the way that it is, I don't see another really good way to go about that other than just motivating people. And as far as regional conferences are concerned, the stuff that people do, like the grants that Sir Leahy did this year for American Atheists and Secular Women, that kind of thing I would love to see happen more. If we could get a couple high school SSA groups to do fundraising to send 2 or 3 of them to a conference, that would be awesome. What we need to do in that case is to equip them with the ability to do that. Hi.
Hi. You said you grew up in Lawrence.
I grew up in Kansas City. I just lived
Okay, Kansas City. I'm from the East Coast. And I see a lot more progressivism amongst young people out there. It's very encouraged. By the time someone's 18, they really are ready to go. They've been exposed to discussing politics or economics or understanding that the decisions that are made influence the way their life is going to be. Do you think that people or young people in the Midwest are more suppressed?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
Can you reach out to those in other regions of the country for
kind of thing does need to happen. We do need to bring those, even just the website resources to people, and get them in contact with other people in other parts of the country. I know that there's a much more active movement in other places. Kansas is kind of repressed in general. Lawrence is a really awesome town in terms of that, so I'm sure that people who grew up in Lawrence had a lot more involvement in that kind of thing. But there's not very many groups in person. Like there's a couple in Kansas City, I think they're on the Missouri side. Yeah, this part of the country in general is just really, so all we can do is provide internet resources and try to get individual high schools to support the non-theists in their area. Purple?
Now, I know you're not in college at the moment, but you are college age. Have you thought about going to the local WSU and the student alliance there and talking to them about going to these local high schools here in Wichita and starting groups?
I haven't gotten really involved in my physical community. Like I said, I live in Lawrence, and they've got like one group there that they can do things with. I'm really kind of bad about getting physically involved with things because of my work schedule and everything.
But to be clear, you don't feel that you've been excluded from it?
I feel that I've been disadvantaged because of my location. Well, okay, actually, because I thought that up until today that SOMA was a student-only group, I did feel excluded because I am college age and because I have no intention of going to college. And I think that's another aspect of ageism, resulting to experience is that I don't want to go to college. I will do it if I absolutely have to be able to achieve my goals, but I have no desire to do that. And so as somebody my age, I'm not being reached out to because I'm kind of in an in-between place. I'm not going to college, and I feel like that's kind of a disadvantage. Oh, there are so many of you. Yeah.
You talked about maybe not having the voting requirement being arbitrary age. And I might imagine this is something last time I test people.
That would be ideal to me.
The thing with that is that that's already been used in the past to discriminate against people and made illegal by Voting Rights Act. The southern states were using literacy tests to suppress the black people who were intelligent but not educated. So they couldn't pass the test, so they couldn't make their voice heard.
Yeah, but I'm not necessarily saying a written test. And we don't have like a huge giant group of people that are being intentionally kept from learning how to read. So I think that the situation is a lot different now, and that tests can be administered in a lot of different ways. And the things you'd be testing for are so varied that I couldn't even throw out examples because I don't know, reading comprehension, not necessarily one of them, like knowledge of politics and the impact of certain issues on the economy, that kind of stuff, I think would be a better basis for a test rather than literacy itself being an issue.
So it's just how informed people are.
Pretty much, yeah. Oh God. Hi, JT. How you doing?
Hi. I'm going to be that asshole. I always hate hearing Q&As, make a comment rather than a question.
Sure.
Just because I've already come up a few times. For the people who have the idea that you can go into high schools and find atheists to start a group, you actually cannot do that. That is against the law.
No, not going in,
Okay.
but like Facebook. I'm Facebook friends with a lot of people who are still in high school.
That you can do.
That's what I
Outside
was.
school hours.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I meant, by the way. Don't go into people's high schools. That's not good.
I'm going to be honest and say that when I first saw the subject of speech, I rolled my eyes and went, oh great, another ism I have to be worried about.
Exactly.
But after listening to the audience questions and watching everything you put on there, I have two 19-year-old daughters. And we have had this conversation throughout their entire lives about the ageism that they've encountered and the arbitrary crap laws that we have. And listening to the audience, I got to say, I'm disappointed in some of the questions because what we're talking about here, especially when I hear, well, young people, aren't aware of that. I know more adults who are more politically ignorant than some of the children I hang out with on a daily basis.
That's
The fact that our questions are showing this ageism is important. I think the subject is important, and I'm so mad at myself that I rolled my eyes when I first saw the subject. Kudos to you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
I just want to say, I guess I'll just talk loud. I think you're right. I'd rather have a well-informed 17-year-old voting than a completely uninformed 30-year-old voting, because if they have no idea what's going on, they really shouldn't be. I mean, it's good to get everyone registered to vote, and everyone should vote if they are up to speed on what all the topics are, but if you have no idea and you're just going to vote down the line, that's really not going to help anything.
So how do you propose to accomplish that?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, there's really, I say you can't really police that, or I mean, if Lux's suggestion for maybe some sort of test, but then again, you raised the issue of discrimination by the test, so it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? So you have to either allow people who maybe want to be involved and are informed, or you have to let people who aren't informed be involved anyway, just because it's really hard to, like she's saying, it's really hard to pick and choose how you're going to get those people. But I don't want to take too much limelight away from the Lux.
Any more hands? Anybody? DJ?
Yeah. So to be just to vent on this one issue regarding voting, I tend to agree with the policy proposals mentioned on stage just now, but we should concede that they are emphatically anti-democratic. They are elitist. These are proposals that say only people who are culturally or politically literate should vote, only people who are educated should vote, and if we propose that, we need to realize that that is not in the spirit of democracy, maybe in republicanism or something, where only the few make our policy decisions, only the educated among us. But the minute we start talking about limiting voting to only people who know what's going on or are educated, we're actually aping some of the policy proposals of neoconservatives and people on the far right. I just want to get that out there so we know what we're talking about. This veers from progressivism into aping some really conservative ideology. And I wanted to throw that out.
No, that's a fair point, and I understand what you're saying, and I agree. I'm not saying that adults should not be allowed to vote if they're uninformed. I'm more just speaking like of exceptions of people under the age. But that also could be so much better addressed by simply educating the public, by completely changing the way the media brings the information to people's faces.
And your proposal is to change mass media.
Well, all of it. It's a cultural problem. All these problems, ageism, classism, sexism, they are all cultural problems that have to have a wide range of different ways that they need to be approached. I think everybody should be educated about what's going on in politics. I think every single person should care and should vote, but that's not the case. And we have to start looking at the causes for why people as a whole don't care about politics before we can really get into like specific age demographics, like why do young people? Well, because the examples that they have are people who don't care about politics and they've got nothing else to see there. Best guy.
Okay. I have one more kind of thing, and I completely empathize with you on all the ages and stuff. I started writing whenever I was 14, and it was ridiculous, the amount of stuff that I got. But I want to know where you, and this is just a personal question to you, where you draw the line, because I do think that, and I hate to make waves with this, but the ageism is helpful to a certain extent. Just as I don't think that a 4-year-old wrestler should be competing with a 12-year-old wrestler. If a 10-year-old hits me, I'm not going to hit him back. If a 30-year-old hits me, I'm going to hit him. I think that there are certain boundaries where ageism is an appropriate source of like social contract. And I'm just wondering, like, where you as a personal, are you just drawing it on the intelligence level, or like the overall like respect of the, like how you are treated overall as a human being? That's an ageism problem. Because I do emphasize with the problem of ageism, don't get me wrong, but I was just wondering where you personally draw the line of where the distinction needs to be made.
You say things like ageism has its place, and I'm just like, well, sexism has its place too. Women should be at home with the kids, and it's hard for me to get past that similarity that happens in my head. It's so arbitrary. It's so hard to decide, a 4-year-old not wrestling with a 12-year-old is a matter of physical differences and not a matter of simply their age and the number of years that they've been on the planet. Because 2 12-year-olds the same age could be equally horribly pitted against one another. You could have like a big 12-year-old versus a small 12-year-old. So I guess I don't understand the question. Generally, I would like to be treated better.
Okay. So you're like, you're thinking that as a more, and I'm not downplaying it, as a conceptual overall respect, not as a completely encompassing practical kind of thing.
I think that one would lead to the other. I think that conceptually viewing young people as competent would just kind of fix a lot of problems in and of itself. Are you trying to stop us?
Actually, I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll need to cut it short.
Okay.
So pick one.
Who's got a good one? Got a good one?
We're going to try. Okay.
Yeah, you can have it. Thank you.
So, back to the whole politically informed voting. The problem I see with that is it would tend to give more power to the people who decide who is politically informed. Because
Do you know what the debt ceiling is? I think is a good question. A lot of people don't know. I didn't know until very recently. I had to find out by myself because nobody explained it, because nobody knows what it is. I think it's possible that it could give more power to those people, but it depends on what kind of questions you're asking. It depends on what kind of qualifications you're looking for. What is it that we want in a voter? You know, we want them to probably have at least once read the Constitution. Maybe understand what the First Amendment actually is and what it says. Because some people seem to believe that it doesn't imply the freedom from religion. Again, very broad problem, lots of different ways to come at it. Don't have exactly the right solutions yet.
All right, we're going to have to close there, but looks like you're going to be available outside to answer some more
I'm
questions.
going to be around. I'll be here.
All right. So I guess Lux will be available out in the lobby to answer some more questions, and then we'll have our next speaker coming up in like 15 minutes.